Welcome everybody to Unima Talks. My name is Shemin. I'm the Unima representative for Trinidad and Tobago, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Craig Shemin. Craig Shemin is the president of the Jim Henson Legacy, Muppet historian, the author of Sam and Friends, the story of Jim Henson's first television show. Began his career with a 14-year stint at the Jim Henson Company, where he wrote television strips, meeting films, computer games, trading cards, licensed products, and most anything else that was associated with the Muppets. Craig's television writing credits include Clifford the Big Red Dog, Lou and Lou, Safety Patrol, Tasty Time with Zifronk, Emmy nomination. Oh. The Wobulous World of Dr. Seuss, WGA nominated, Courage the Cowardly Dog, one of my favorites, and Dora and Friends Into the City. He produced and directed an award-winning documentary about the making of Emmett Otter's Jug Band and wrote the Muppets Character Encyclopedia. So we're just waiting for Craig to join in. Oh, hi, Craig.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was gonna say it's nice to see you, but I don't see you.
I didn't
Yeah,
mean that. That just
that's
didn't.
okay.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there we are. Oh, great.
It's all set and everything.
Oh, I love your setup.
Thank you. We did this. My wife is a performer, so we just had the foresight this a couple of years before the
Uh-huh.
pandemic. We
Hmm.
decided to redo this walk-in closet and get rid of a lot of the toys and collectibles that I had saved up over the
Oh,
years and turn it into a little recording booth because she
okay.
had started doing a lot of self-tapes for auditions at home, and
Uh-huh.
it ended up being good. She does a lot of looping in here, and I do a lot of
Hmm.
podcast recordings.
Yeah.
uh, it ended up working out.
Okay, I think I need to set something up like this. Okay, so how's it
Everything is available on Amazon.
Yeah, I can see that. All right. But Craig, it's finally nice to meet you.
It's nice to be met, and it's
Oh,
great to meet you too.
okay. So Craig, let me just give you a little insight on myself. As we spoke on Facebook before, my name is Shemin Rakal. I'm the Unima representative for Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm on a journey to make puppetry something worthwhile in Trinidad, something sustainable. And I decided to start with the best I could find, TV puppetry, Jim Henson Legacy, and that's why I came to you.
Well, I'm pleased that you did. One of the things that was very interesting about Jim's attitudes, he was a very big supporter of Unima, and he was a president and was very involved with Puppeteers of America. But
Hmm.
he thought very strongly. One of the reasons he supported Unima and supported other artists is that he didn't want people to think the whole definition of puppetry was the Muppets because the Muppets had
Correct.
become so successful.
Hmm.
So it's something that Cheryl Henson carries on now
Hmm.
as head
Hmm.
of the Jim Henson Foundation.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
she helps support and fund all kinds of puppetry and all kinds of performers
Hmm.
to create new work and just sort of let people know how diverse the world of puppetry is.
Hmm. I did get to meet Cheryl earlier this year at the Henson workshop in Astoria.
Hmm.
We spoke a lot about it, and she did say that her dad's work with the with Henson Foundation was about basically showing everybody that you could do puppets your way, and the Muppets doesn't have to be the only way. So Craig.
Yeah, and that's kind of it echoes the way he started
Hmm.
because when he started out,
Hmm.
most other puppeteers that were working in television were bringing their theatrical techniques
Hmm.
to television, and he didn't really have theatrical techniques because he
Hmm.
had never done puppetry before. So he
Right.
sort of did. He was really one of the first people to specifically create characters and techniques for
Hmm.
television, and
Hmm.
it's just amazing that the things that he started out doing when he was in high school and
Hmm.
college have become sort of the accepted techniques for television puppeteers around the world.
Yeah. That's the thing in that it's impacted us to the point that Sesame Street is all over the place in different languages. There's so many different stuff. I recently connected with Sesame Street Bangladesh, and it's fun to see that they tell their own story on their own street, and so much has come from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. So Craig, I want to delve a little deep into the Craig stuff more, more than Henson stuff, and we make that connection from there, and how puppetry has led you into your work, especially that book you wrote about Sam and Friends. It seems really interesting, and I'm waiting for my copy on Amazon right now.
Well, I appreciate that.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting because I wrote about Jim Henson, um, working in sort of the same period of time when I got interested in working for Jim, because I was in college. I'd always been a Muppet fan, and when I was in college, I was trying to figure out what to do for an internship, and I happened to be watching a documentary called Henson's Place. It's still out and around, and it gave me the idea of trying to get an internship at Henson. And of course, like, wow, I can work in the workshop and all that stuff. And I did get the internship, but I was in the public relations department, so I got to visit the shop numerous times and spend time there. But I I didn't get to do the fun stuff of working with the Muppets themselves generally, and so I was answering phone calls and making copies most of my summer.
But I mean, in the grand scheme of things now, I think it's something that's a bit of a diamond in the rough, really, because it's not as easy to get into that arena now, is it?
No, no.
No.
Yeah, and the whole culture of internships have
Mhm.
changed
Yeah.
because it used to be um, that I was able, because my parents lived in New Jersey, I was able to live at home,
Hmm.
take the bus in. So having that internship that didn't pay wasn't a great hardship for me because
Hmm.
I had a place to live.
Right.
Um, and it was, but what has happened now is that, oh, you know, companies have shifted in their internship things, and the government frowns upon, excuse me, the government frowns upon people working for nothing.
Hmm.
So a lot of that has changed to uh, paying jobs, and internships are just a different thing nowadays.
It is. It is. And what would you think, like, would be your place if you decided to actually like go into puppets? Or did you like start off thinking like, hey, I'm gonna be a puppeteer? And did you like think about
I
pursuing it
did,
then?
yeah. Yeah, I did. I pursued it in college a bit. When I was
Okay.
in college, I made a puppet project. It was called um, On Our Own, and it was basically a show for kids to learn how to do things that they can do on their own. Making their own toys and making up games and
Mhm.
stories and things. So I shot that in our campus TV studio, and uh, got a bunch of my friends to work on it, and I built all the puppets. And of course, what I knew at that time was the Muppets, so a lot of
Mhm.
my characters were looking like the Muppet characters. I had a duck with very big pupil eyes, and I had an eel
Mhm.
that I named Maury after Jim Henson. His middle name was Maury.
Mhm. Mhm.
I thought, hey, it's clever. It's a moray eel, but his name is Maury instead of
Mhm.
Moray. Um, and it was a lot of fun.
Mhm.
And I but what, when you are starting to, you're doing that on a campus where there's nothing else happening with
Mhm.
puppets. And once
Mhm.
you get to New York, and I did that after I had my internship, so I
Mhm.
knew, what kinds of glue to get
Right.
to glue the puppets.
Mhm.
Um, but then when I went to work for the Muppets, I realized, well, gee, if I want to be building puppets, I have to be really, really good at and much better than what I am now.
Mhm,
And I pursued performing a little while,
mhm,
um, but again, I had to, you know, be a really, really good puppeteer to be in that presence. And I'm not, because I'm not a strong singer, and many of the Muppet performers, you got to be a really good singer. Um, but what I could do was write, and I thought that that's an area that I could do pretty well.
mhm,
So that's what I ended up doing. But I had some experience. I did do a little puppetry in a TV special that had, it was one of those situations where they needed every warm body that could possibly lift a puppet above
mhm,
their head,
mhm.
and it was the Muppets Celebrate Jim Henson.
Uh-huh.
It was the tribute special that was done after Jim's passing.
Right.
So I
Mhm,
was Waldorf in that, in the
mhm,
last scene in that, and it was a lot of fun. But
mhm,
the more I did it, the more I felt that I really wasn't great at doing it. Or, I could have put more effort into it. But
mhm, mhm,
now that I see how hard my wife works and
mhm,
I see how good she is at it,
mhm,
I know that I made the right decision. Every now and then I'll pick up a puppet.
mhm,
A few years back, one of the puppeteers, John Kennedy, did a music video project and called a bunch of friends over, and so I ended up puppeteering
mhm.
briefly on that. But yeah, I think I made the right decision.
Well, I think so too. Um, After meeting Jim Krupa last year at the O'Neill, his story is similar to yours. He said, at that time things were really different, and he just happened to meet Kermit Love at while looking for colleges, and he was teaching at Pratt. He was a lecturer at Pratt, and he's like, "Hey, you like puppets? We're gonna do puppets," and
Yeah,
that's
Noel
how he,
McNeil
yeah,
had a similar
yeah,
journey with Kermit.
yeah. hmm And so sort of a different opportunity, and a lot of it here to me sounds really distant, And for me, um, I basically fell into this community through the pandemic. Um, we we saw an ad in 2019 for Pop It Up on the Henson lot, and I was like, you know what? I need to go do this. I don't know if I'll ever get to do it again. And we went there. We saw Pop It Up. It's an amazing show. My life was changed. My teenage dreams of being a Henson puppeteer just came alive again, or even a puppeteer in general. And from there, um, I just started going down the rabbit hole, looking at podcasts, looking at trying to find some kind of community after pandemic hit. And through the LA Guild and all these people that I met and they're wonderful to me, basically led me down all the way to the Eugene O'Neill Theater, and that's basically how I got into this. And now I'm talking to you because I'm trying to find ways to create that community here in Trinidad. We don't have much puppeteers in Trinidad, and the ones that we do are not like on a TV scale or anything. So it's really something I'm trying to foster. And I know you're the president of the Jim Henson Legacy, is it? Yeah.
Yep.
So tell me, what was it like meeting Jim for the first time? How did you get around there? Because I know you're working at the offices. How at some point you're gonna meet him, right?
Well, yeah, and it happened when I was an intern. Jim, when I first got there, he was away in England. I
Uh-huh.
think they were doing The Storyteller
Uh-huh.
at the time, and I met him on the day of the company softball game and picnic.
Uh-huh.
Every
Uh-huh.
summer, the Hensons would have a big picnic and softball game in Central Park, and I happened to be hanging around. And the thing about Jim is that the company was not a huge company.
Uh-huh.
They would hire more people when they were in production, but it was probably like 70, 80 people in New York at that time. And Jim knew everybody. So he saw me and he didn't know me. So he actually came up and was trying to figure out who I was. And there was an umpire at the softball game who was a bit of a character, and they would hire him to umpire the softball game. And I just sort of, Jim's coming up to me. We're watching behind the backstop, and I just sort of like, I definitely know who he is. And I'm trying to make conversation. Oh, that guy, that umpire is great. And Jim's like, yeah, he did our game last year. And then he's like, were you at our game last year? I'm like, no, no, I'm an intern. I just started. He's like, oh, you're the intern. And I'm Jim Henson. And I'm like, you know, I, I know who he is. But he was very nice. He sort of struck up a conversation for a little bit, and then the innings changed, and he didn't have a baseball glove, so I loaned him mine because we were on opposing teams, and
Mhm.
we'd pass it back and forth for the rest of the game. And at the end of the day, I had him autograph it, and I had Frank autograph it, Frank Oz. So I think I have the only game used Jim Henson baseball glove that's signed by Jim.
That's amazing. So you did some work outside of the Muppet universe and stuff in your writing. I know you did Clifford the Big Red Dog and did some Wobulous World stuff.
Well,
Tell me about
Wobulous
it.
World
Yeah.
was a Henson production, so that was
Oh yeah.
during my
hmm
time at Henson.
hmm
And Clifford was only a couple of years ago. It was fairly recently. But one of the things that that I started doing outside work with with the Henson Company's permission while I was still at the company, because they saw it as a way of me getting more experience
hmm
without them having to pay for it.
hmm
So did a show on Nickelodeon. I did a script for Gullah Gullah Island. That was
hmm
my first
hmm
Writers Guild experience, and I wrote some scripts for a Sid and Marty Croft project called Toby Terrier,
hmm
and Courage the Cowardly Dog was an animated show that I
hmm
had worked on. And that allowed me, the Henson people to see, oh, well, he can do scripts, he can do
hmm
this. And so when they saw me doing this outside work, they started giving me some more opportunities inside the company.
hmm Okay. So I have some questions here, and I want to go down the line, right?
I have some answers. At least
Ah,
I hope I
all
do.
right. Okay. So let's see.
Excuse me.
What what's a fun fact about Jim Henson you found out while working there?
Um, well, he wore glasses. Not a lot of people saw him with glasses.
That's true.
Yeah. So I remember going to see him in his office because one of my jobs in public relations department was to write quotes
hmm
for situations, and I'll go up and drop things off or ask him about a quote, and I'd see him sitting at his desk reading a script with glasses on, and I'm like,
hmm
oh, Jim Henson wears glasses. That's interesting.
Hmm.
And when I started doing some work with the historical stuff, I actually
hmm
saw Jim kept this journal that
hmm
Karen Falk has published
hmm
pieces of it online in
hmm
a blog called Jim's Red Book. And he actually mentioned that in the journal, like in the 80s. It's like he drew a little pair of glasses and wrote, I get glasses. Um, so yeah, that was something because he didn't really, I don't think he wore them on
No,
camera.
no.
Or,
I would have never thought that he wore
there you go.
glasses. Yeah, that's fun. That's a fun fact. Um, with the Red Book, is basically how I found out a lot of stuff because the minute that came out, and it's been up for a while, right? It's
Yeah, well, the blog has been out for a while, and I think
hmm
Karen has just been sort of fixing it because
hmm
they've moved servers over the years. The
hmm
Henson website
hmm
has moved, so there were a lot of dead links, and I think she's trying to fix it. And then she turned it into a book
hmm
called Imagination Illustrated,
Okay.
which sort of expands upon the entries and does a
hmm
lot more annotation, a lot of
hmm
pictures. And the book is wonderful. I think it's out of print, but you might be able to find copies out in the
I
world on
think
Amazon.
so. I think I saw one in the public library here. I actually did. Funny enough, while poking around on the Red Book, I saw that in the very early stages of the Henson Company, Jim, Jerry Jewell, Frank Oz, they went to Puerto Rico to do an ad for, I think it was at Barclays Bank. I
Yeah, it
think
was
it's
one of the banks, I think.
right.
Yeah.
So they did that ad in Puerto Rico in Spanish, and the bank loved it so much. their Trinidad branch had asked them, "Hey,
Uh,
could you overdub that in English and get it to us?" I've been looking for that all over the place. I've been looking everywhere to see if I could find that footage. I'd love to see it.
I'll
But it
have to
was
take a
like
look. I don't know if we have it.
but I saw the Puerto Rican version of it, but nothing looks Muppet though. Like it's so like it's so very different to like that I think it could be even like before Sesame and stuff because things look
Hmm.
rudimentary. Like when it was like Sam and Friends stuff, is no recognizable characters or
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. So I have another one for you. I asked you what's a fun fact about Jim Henson just now. I want to hear a fun fact about Craig Shemin.
Um, I um, let's see. Uh, I'm a big fan of Jack Benny's.
Hmm.
Um, I found out that recently I found out that Neil Gaiman is also a big Jack Benny fan. I'm actually starting to write a book about Jack Benny's TV appearances,
Hmm. Hmm.
and over the years, I was always looking for connections between Jack Benny and Jim Henson, and they
Hmm.
did a bunch of uh, variety show appearances when they
Hmm.
were on the same show.
Hmm.
And Jim actually wanted to produce a TV special featuring Jack Benny, making the whole idea was that it was a holiday special,
Hmm.
but the holiday was Income Tax Day,
Hmm.
and that it was all going to be built around Jack Benny and you know income tax, and it never got done. But there's a treatment for it, and it's great fun. So yeah, that's one fun fact about me. I'm also a fan of game shows,
Oh, yeah.
television game shows,
Hmm.
and I build Lego
Hmm.
models in my spare time. So those are three fun facts about me.
So do I. We haven't finished the Sesame Street model yet.
No, it's still in the box because
Yeah.
I love building the stuff, but I just don't have a lot of space to keep them displayed, and
Yep.
I hate to build one of those models and then take it apart because I feel
Yeah.
like like undoing everything I did.
Hmm.
I build my own. I sort of combine the game show appreciation with the Lego. So I build Lego models of game shows,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'm going to be donating some of them to the Strong Museum for play. They've asked for a couple of my game show sets to enter
Hmm.
their archive.
Hmm. Going back to that, what you just said about how you connected the Jim Henson thing to the other thing. Have you ever had like a full circle moment? Like I've had it recently at the O'Neill. Like like you see that moment, you get that moment back in the day when you were a kid, and you're like, hey, this is what I want to do. And then you're standing somewhere like, hey, I'm here. Tell me that moment for you.
Yeah, well, um, I don't know if there's any one moment, but I've had a whole bunch of them.
Hmm.
The whole idea of when when I was a kid, when I was, let's see, The Muppet Show came out when I was about 10 years old.
Hmm.
And that was really when it sparked my
Hmm.
fandom. And this was before Google and before the
Hmm.
internet.
Hmm.
So I would go, excuse me, I would go to the public library and I would look up books about Jim Henson. And you'd go to the magazine files, and they have microfilm of all these magazines. And I'd look up the articles in Time Magazine and Life Magazine and all of these things about Muppets and how the Muppets were built. And I sort of kept like this little book of clippings. And I would see all of these fun situations. And then later on, I would see, hey, I'm there. I'm
Hmm.
on a set like this. And yeah,
Hmm.
I helped write a thing. And I think it was when we did the live concerts at Carnegie Hall and
Hmm.
in New Zealand, and I wrote those, and those are where you can experience sort of the whole thing because you're putting
Hmm.
on a show in front of a live audience, and you're hearing the response and you're
Hmm.
hearing the laughter. And those are the kinds of events where I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm getting to do this. The most recent one um, was when back in September of last year of 2022, Disney hired me to produce a panel for them at their D23 annual or semi-annual uh, D23 Expo in Anaheim, and it was celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Muppet Christmas Carol. And and we put together a whole panel, and I wrote a script with Jim Lewis for that, and we put together a medley, and we had performers, we had the creative team, Brian Henson and Paul Williams and Dave Goles and Polly Smith, who did the costumes, and we did a whole big thing. And it was weeks and weeks of work that
Mm-hmm.
that ends in an hour.
Yeah.
Everything's strictly scheduled at
Mm-hmm.
D23. So whether you're done or not, you got an hour.
Yeah.
And so it was a thrill because I'm there in the back calling the slides or what we're putting on the screen, and I'm like, oh, they're going out of order, and we go to skip to this, skip to that. So it's like, on one hand, I'm there,
Mm-hmm.
and but on the other hand, I can't enjoy it because it's like, you get a feeling. It's like, boy, I'd give anything to be out there watching this
Mm-hmm.
because I'm hearing them respond to it. And I'm like, I'm a big fan. I want to be out there responding, but I'm back here telling the people how when to go on, and telling the slides, and telling Paul Williams that you got to go around this side, and and it was a great experience. But it's like, one of the things that they don't tell you
Mm-hmm.
is, when you're a fan of something, and then when you get a job working on it, it's never the same. You're seeing how the sausage is made. Sometimes you're making
Mm-hmm.
the sausage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a great experience and a great feeling. But sometimes I want to go back to being a fan. And I think everybody has those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we were doing the concert in New Zealand, the Jim Henson
Mm-hmm.
retrospectal,
Mm-hmm.
and it was amazing things. We had like the 70-piece New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. We
Mm-hmm.
had Brett McKenzie hosting, and we had some of the performers, and we did a whole big thing. But Dave Goles, who was on that trip to New Zealand as part of the retrospectacle, he didn't want to do the concert because he felt we didn't have enough rehearsal time,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't comfortable with that. So we wrote around it. But Dave came to the concert,
Mm-hmm.
and he never gets to watch
Mm-hmm.
the Muppet stuff. It was an entirely different experience for him
Mm-hmm.
to be able to sit and watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's a fun thing.
Yeah, because I get it. While at the O'Neill last year, we did Howdy Do. That's a project that Jim Krupa works on. Well, he's created. It's basically a cowboy variety show. It's a little campy, but it's awesome. And after performing, after rehearsing for an entire week, learning this entire show, and we performed it at the end of the O'Neill, you get that feeling like, I'd like to see this. And then when you see it afterwards, because like we waited months after until they got everything done there to send out the one video that they shot. And when you sit down and you look at it, wow, this was a 30-minute show that we took an entire week to cram it into and learn this and build it. And then like, hey, it was done in a flash. It was up and done and everything.
Yeah, and that's sort of, that's the great thing about television,
Mm-hmm.
that it's permanent, it stays.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something very special about a concert
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't stay.
Mm-hmm.
Because we did these two concerts at Carnegie Hall,
Mm-hmm.
Jim Henson's Musical World. And because it's Carnegie Hall, there are all these costs involved to record it, to
Mm-hmm.
videotape it, is very expensive. And they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have great video equipment at Carnegie Hall. We would have had to
Mm-hmm.
bring in,
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So we don't have a video record of that concert. We have
Oh.
one of New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
but what makes it special is that the people who were in that room experienced something that no one else can experience. It was this collective happening, a shared event
Yeah.
that only these, two performances took place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to make it special. It's going to make it more special to them in their
Mm-hmm.
memories,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that they were there to experience something really quite magical,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm. I guess yeah, it's
except
a
for the people who bootlegged on YouTube. So you can go
I
online and
was
see
gonna say
clips,
that. I saw like the clips on YouTube with people bootlegged, but
which I can't condone that, but I really appreciate the fact that someone got some stuff out of there.
we can't condone it, but I'll tell you something.
Excuse me.
For for us here in Trinidad, we don't get that kind of content. We don't see it here. I mean, there's a big theater thing down here, like there's a lot of
Hmm.
like live theater and stuff, but there's not a lot of like puppetry forward stuff. So everything we know and everything we consume comes from the internet or television. And you know, like as I said, like I go down the rabbit hole sometimes. I just like randomly hit everything I could find and like look at old Henson stuff that I could find just to get a feel of things. And one thing I saw that you did a bit of a promo, was it? I'm not sure this special. I'm not sure what it was, but you did a promo and you did a bit where you stood in front the house that they call Henson Manor, is it? And then you did a bit with a puppet. That was you, right? You were doing the
That was
puppet.
me, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was one of my few puppetry experiences. There was a contest
Mhm,
about nine years ago or so,
mhm,
8 or 9 years ago, um, and it was for the opportunity to appear on Turner Classic Movies, to host
mhm,
a movie with Robert Osborne,
mhm,
late Robert Osborne, who was then the primary host. And so to enter this contest, you had to shoot a video of yourself
mhm,
introducing a movie. So I said, well, I'll do the Muppet movie. I can go shoot it in front of the Henson Townhouse, which was
mhm,
no longer at that time the Henson
mhm,
Townhouse. It had been sold years earlier, but it was still there.
mhm,
And I had this puppet that my wife Stephanie, who was in Avenue Q, she had
mhm,
commissioned Rick Lyon to build that puppet of me for my 40th birthday.
mhm,
So I had that, and I said, "Oh, it'll be a cute gimmick. I'll introduce the Muppet movie, and I'll turn into a puppet at the end." So I did that. I entered the contest. I posted the video, and they announced the winner of the contest, um, but it wasn't me. And then, like shortly after they announced the winner, um, I think they had announced the winner already, but maybe they hadn't. But I get a phone call from Turner Classic Movies and say, "Listen, we didn't say this in the contest rules because we didn't
mhm,
want to, we wanted to make it a surprise.
mhm.
But we're actually picking 20 people
Oh.
to fly down to Atlanta because it's
Mhm,
the 20th anniversary.
mhm,
So we're picking 20 people to come and introduce a movie with Robert.
mhm,
And we saw your video. We want you to be one of them." So it was a delightful thing.
mhm,
Um, and it was a great couple of days. They flew
mhm,
us down to Atlanta. They had a cocktail party for us on the set, and Robert gave us all autographed copies of his book. And um, then they bought out a restaurant the second night and took us all out to dinner with all of their executives. And we spent 2 days. We spent days. There were 20 of us, so they had 2 shoot days, and each of us would do 10 of us would do one day and then
mhm,
the other 10. And when we weren't in the studio, they
mhm,
took us around Atlanta and they
mhm,
gave us great tours of, they took us to the Coca-Cola
mhm,
experience, and they took us to the aquarium, and we went to Margaret Mitchell's house, and we had a great time. Um, and it was terrific to get to sit with Robert Osborne because he had Kermit on
mhm,
as a guest
mhm.
programmer. So we talked a
Okay.
little bit about Kermit. So that's the story behind that video.
It's an awesome story. And you've mentioned Stephanie D'Abruzzo so many times. Let me ask you, did you meet Stephanie before Sesame Street and Henson, or did you meet her after? How
I met
how
her
did that happen?
before she was involved with those things. We
Okay.
both went to Northwestern
Okay.
University in
Hmm.
Evanston, but we were not there at the same time.
Okay.
Um, I am a few years older than she is, but
Hmm.
we uh, had friends that overlapped both of us.
Hmm.
And I was headed back to campus on business. I was going to Chicago on business because there was a Henson exhibit and a museum in Chicago. And a friend of ours, Chris Araneta, was going to throw a party and said, "Oh, come to the party. You're going to be in town." So I went to the party, and that's when I met Stephanie. And she was very interested in puppetry. She had started doing some puppetry work on campus, and we just sort of chatted. She was just a kid, and I graduated, a year or
Mm-hmm.
two ago,
Mm-hmm.
and she was I don't know what year she was at that point. She must have been a freshman. But a couple of years later, uh, we uh, we are in touch again because she had done a puppetry project that won her a Student Emmy Award,
Mm-hmm.
and that got her the attention of David Rudman, who
Mm-hmm.
was one of the Sesame Street puppeteers. And at that time, they were doing serious search for female performers for Sesame Street because there was a real lack of
Mm-hmm.
female
Mm-hmm.
representation. And so David went and visited her on campus, and they talked, and he invited her to the audition, and she took a train. This was her senior year, so she took a train to New York, and it was just about 30 years ago this month, and she did the audition and kept getting called back, and we, when she got to town, I think we had dinner because I was one of the few people that she knew. And then she kept getting called back, and she was running out of money to stay at the youth hostel. And I invited her to stay with me if she needed a place to stay, because she hadn't anticipated getting called back. She was on Friday. It was supposed to be over on a Friday, and she got called back to Monday. They were going to
Mm-hmm.
have the Sesame Street producers there, and I said, "Well, we know that technically today is the last of the audition, but if you come back on Monday, you'll meet the Sesame Street producers." So, she said, "Well, I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, if you need a place to stay for the weekend, you know, you can stay with me
Mm-hmm.
and go in on Monday." So that's what happened. And during that weekend, we realized that we had a lot in common, and we were, enjoying each other's company. And eventually it took off from there.
A great
And
story.
when she after she did her Monday session, she was getting ready to go to the train station, and that's when we had our first kiss.
Oh, it's awesome. You'd think that it's more like we met something more Hensonish, but it's not. It's like just a little coincidence, and that's
Yeah, exactly.
pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. Yeah. You know, um, with a lot of like hype coming for that the new series that we have coming out, because is it tomorrow or the next day they're gonna release the Muppets Mayhem
I think it's
series,
May 10th. So
May
it's
10th. That's 2 days,
yeah.
3 days from now. Yeah. Tell me, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Stephanie is actually involved in it. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
by the time people listen to this, they'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to see how. But
Yeah.
she got to work on it, and I think the idea is really fun
Mm-hmm.
to sort of look at the lives of the more secondary characters,
Mm-hmm.
because there are only so many things you can do with the main characters over and over again. And from what I've seen, and I haven't seen all that much of it, it looks like it's a lot of fun. And I've heard some of the reviews. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen the show yet, but it's the reviews are very positive, and I hope it's very successful because that'll mean more Muppet content.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what tends to happen is that if a show, and this goes for everything and not just Muppets, but if a
Mm-hmm.
show does well, it'll bring on, more of the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm rooting for it. Um, I think that there have been other shows in the past that have been less than successful
Mm-hmm.
in bringing the Muppets. Some things want to, you know, um, I like things that just sort of keep the Jim's original sort of spirit alive,
Mm-hmm.
which is let's have a real fun, silly time.
Hmm.
Let's not be so serious, and let's sort of have fun um, playing against authority um, and just do things that are a little off the wall.
Yeah. And that being said, you know, I I try to find ways to connect with that universe, or even connect on that level to find out, like, I listen to everyone's stories because I listen to every single podcast I could find with you guys, from the Beretta Brothers to Below the Frame, and everything else that I could possibly get into. And everybody says that, the one thing they try to foster is to try is that attitude that Jim had, that same thing. He tries to not take it too seriously, give everyone a fair chance. Um, but at the same time, he was really a stickler for the work. Like the work had to be good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he would not compromise on his work. And something that I think that a lot of people don't understand is that you can't compromise with Muppet style puppetry. It has to be right, has to get done right. And that with that, tell me, give me a lesson that you learned from spending time with Jim, like something that showed you, this is who Jim is, and this is something that I'd like to carry on and share with everybody else.
Well, sadly, I didn't get to spend that much time with Jim because
Hmm.
I was only at the company for a couple of years before he passed away. But um, when the first piece of material that I wrote that got performed live by the Muppets, or not live, but taped by the Muppets, was done by Jim. And it was a Disney shareholders meeting. At that time, Disney had made the deal to buy the Henson Company, and a deal that um, later did not go through. And then late years later, the Muppets were sold to Disney. But at this point, um, there were talks going on, and a deal had been made, and they were going to have Kermit appear on video at the Disney shareholders meeting. So I worked at that time in public relations. So they had me write, and I had started writing for different departments in the company. So they had me write the shareholder meeting.
Hmm.
And this was something that really was about a minute and a half. It was going to be an interactive thing with Michael Eisner. And they sent it to Jim, and Jim's like, "Oh, I don't know if it's right," and he sent it to, I think, Bill Prady, one of the other writers, to write. And Bill sent one in, and I don't know what the order there, but Jim Lewis also did a draft. And basically, one of the drafts Disney didn't approve. Another draft Jim still didn't think was right. And so basically came back to me. So they sent me all the drafts, and I took the parts from all of them, and I wrote the final draft, which eventually was approved by everybody. And I think that, that was a chance where I saw how seriously Jim took everything. Even then, this was something that was never going to be seen again, but he knew it had to be right. It had to, this was something that's just going to be done once live and over. But he took it so seriously, and he put just as much attention into it as he would doing a script for a TV show.
Hmm.
So I think that's one of the things that I learned, was that everything needs to be handled with great respect and attention,
Hmm.
not just the stuff that, quote, matters,
Hmm.
unquote. There are people that just will sort of say, "Oh, okay, this is a script for a show, so this has to be good." And this is, an address to a paper company, and but what I learned from Jim, and what I try to do, is that no matter what it is, if it involves the Muppets, it's got to be done right.
Hmm.
And then I take that to my other work too. If I do an episode of Clifford the Big Red Dog, each one that I wrote, I tried to make it special in some way to me.
Hmm.
And if it was special to me, I knew it would be special to other people. So I think that's one of the things I learned from working with Jim is to take every project with the utmost uh, intensity and seriousness, even if it's seen by others as being something that's less than um, the A1 stuff.
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about your recent book and what inspired that book and how difficult it was to get that footage.
Well, I am glad to talk about that book. And as
Ah.
long as we're talking about it, I will mention it. It's called
Mhm,
Sam and Friends, the story
mhm,
of Jim Henson's first
mhm,
television show. Available at bearmanormedia.com or Amazon, wherever you are around the
mhm,
world, we'll
mhm,
have it. Um, I think that I had been fascinated by Sam and Friends and Jim's early stuff and the early commercials for a long time. I started seeing it when had my internship. We could go into um, our main conference room had big 3/4 inch tapes along the wall, so you could go
mhm,
in if you wanted to, while you had your lunch and take a tape. If there was nobody in the conference room, you could take a tape off the wall and put it in the machine and watch it. So that's when I started seeing as much as it existed, and I was really fascinated because there I was at the same age that Jim was when he was making these films,
mhm,
when he was making these shows. And I'm like, that is really amazing. So part of the story why I wanted to do this is that I thought that this would be a very inspirational story to young artists to see what this kid, who was he started working in television when he was in high school and going through college doing it. And I thought this would be a great inspiration to young artists. It's like, well, if this kid can do it, maybe there's stuff that I can do. I don't have to wait for someone to tell me to do something. I can
mhm,
come up with something. So that was part of the inspiration. The other part of the inspiration was Jane Henson. And Jane I knew much better than Jim, because I worked with her for years on the Jim
mhm,
Henson legacy
mhm,
and other historic matters. And I had a great admiration and respect for her. But she never really got um, a lot of credit for her involvement
mhm,
in the Muppets in the early years. And part of that was because she didn't want it. She always deflected the attention.
mhm,
She always, if there was an opportunity, she would deflect it towards Jim.
mhm,
There were times when the University of Maryland, where they both went to, they asked to pay tribute to her in an event. And she would say, well, make it about Jim. I'll come and I'll accept it. I don't think she was very comfortable
mhm,
taking credit for the
mhm,
Muppets. She used to tell me, oh, I'm just a helper. I was a helper to Jim. But, she wasn't. She did a lot. So part of my desire in wanting to write this book was to tell Jane's story.
mhm,
And I think if I had tried to do it while she was still alive, I don't know if she would be completely comfortable with it. Um, but I think that, I've had very nice comments from Lisa Henson, Cheryl
mhm,
Henson. They
mhm,
appreciate it, and Heather. They appreciate telling mom's story,
mhm,
as they
mhm,
say. So that's sort of why I wanted to do it, and it wasn't really possible because there were only about 15 kinescopes, and there were a bunch of scripts, but it was hard to get an idea of what the show was on a regular basis. We had seen like individual episodes. Oh,
mhm,
okay, they lip sync to this, or they do a little sketch, but the show ran for 7.5 years or so. So it's like, that's a long time to be represented by
mhm,
only 15, you know, uh,
mhm,
kinescopes. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I think it was, uh, the Henson Archives, Carla Della Vedova, who is the media archivist, and Karen Falk, who's the director of archives, they found a box that had about 45 reel-to-reel audio tapes. And Jim, they found out by discovering this box, they learned that Jim had started to do audio recordings of Sam and Friends in 1958. And, you know, we had them transferred digitally. And I'm editing these into individual files, and like, boy, this is more than 400 episodes of Sam and Friends that Jim saved, and we couldn't see what was happening. But through that and the acetate recording discs that Jane had saved and the scripts, I was finally able to get a real picture of what 7.5 years of Sam and Friends may have uh, been.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what made it possible to write the book.
Hmm. What journeys did you take it and like that in that process? Like, what was it like going into that space and finding out things about Jim that maybe, we didn't realize through the Muppets? Because Sam and Friends was a totally different type of show from the little I've seen. It wasn't the normal things that we'd see that got a little less adult than Sam and Friends. That's what I get from it. Like it wasn't really geared towards kids as much.
No, it wasn't
Yeah.
geared towards kids at all, really,
Mm-hmm.
because Sam and Friends usually either aired before the NBC national news
Mm-hmm.
in the early evenings or before the Tonight Show, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes both. So with those time slots, you get a fairly adult, sophisticated
Yeah.
audience.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of college kids would watch, and a lot of young professionals. Um, some kids would enjoy it, but it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really aimed at them. And it was
Mm-hmm.
very similar to what happened with the Muppet Show later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the Muppet Show is just a grown-up version of Sam and Friends.
It is.
But instead of records, they get to actually have the actual people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The guest stars on Sam and Friends didn't know they were appearing on Sam and Friends, because you'd get a Danny Kaye record.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Danny Kaye appearing on Sam and Friends, but when they did the Muppet Show, they could have the actual Danny
Danny
Kaye.
Kaye. Correct. Hmm.
So yeah, it was definitely a show that was for grown-ups. Um, and it was, I think that what I was learning about the show is that it was really not one concept throughout. You know, it had little phases based on the evolution of Jim's work. When it first started, it was pretty much consistently record lip syncs,
Mm-hmm.
because Jim wasn't really doing a lot of speaking for characters.
Mm-hmm.
And once they started doing the commercials for Wilkins coffee, that's when the Muppets started speaking a little bit. And then those voices started being used. Jim would use his voice then on Sam and Friends. And
Mm-hmm.
some first, I think Professor Madcliffe may have been the first to talk,
Mm-hmm.
and then Kermit, and then more characters. So suddenly, this show that was just lip syncing to records evolved into, let's do comedy sketches, we'll do intros to the records, we'll still do the records because people like it, but it sort of turned into something else where they now, in some ways, it's a show about putting on a show, and
Mm-hmm.
it's it gets a little more sophisticated with more scenery and more creative stuff. And so I think that you get a feeling that Jim was really growing and evolving
Mm-hmm.
as an artist. And, it was all about trying new things and doing fun stuff with television medium.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that's so awful that, more doesn't exist, because I would have loved to see what was happening
Mm-hmm.
visually.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, because so many of the kinescopes that survive are in black and white, a lot of people don't realize that from, 1959, I think, was it 58 or 59 was the first color broadcast. I
Mm-hmm.
think it was 59. Um, so Sam and Friends was in color for, several years of its run,
Mm-hmm.
but people don't see it. Jane used to tell me she always remembers Sam and Friends as a show in color, because
Mm-hmm.
that was when they stopped doing it, it was in color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but people see it as a black and white remnant.
I've never seen anything in color from all
Yeah,
I
there are
know
a
is
couple
the
of
stuff
films
on
that
YouTube.
survive.
Like
Yeah.
I only know that like what we can find on YouTube and stuff.
If
But
you look on YouTube, if you see there's a show, um, Poison to Poison, there's an episode
mm-hmm.
that was using a record, a Spike Jones record.
Mm-hmm.
And that, what Jim would do, a couple of color things, he would recreate them in a studio,
Mm-hmm.
on film. So it wasn't a kinescope, it was an
Mm-hmm.
actual film of the
Mm-hmm.
episode.
Okay.
So you can see what it looks like in color. There are a couple that survive.
Okay. I'll look into it. We're talking about Jane Henson and her influence with the Muppets. And I've heard the same thing. She's very modest about it, and she didn't see it. She always said that let's curate Jim's legacy. And I
Hmm.
know, with him, everything was basically a short order. So he would take puppets apart and put it away and use it for something else. And it wasn't something that he saw as creating a legacy behind him after him. He saw it as these are my tools and I'm gonna use them. Tell me about like how she curated that work or those puppets and how the Jim Henson legacy continues to do so.
Well, Jane did a lot of saving of stuff. She saved pictures, she saved the acetate records, and they just sort of sat in the garage, until there was an archivist like Karen who sort of took everything and sorted through it. Jane loved that period of Jim's work because it was when she was really involved on a regular basis before she started having children and became
Hmm.
a full time mom.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that it was an important part to her, and I think she also liked that it was that there were some rough edges in the work that was happening then. She kind of I she's told me on more than one occasion that sort of the Muppets got a little too perfect in the way they were made. One of the things I learned in doing the book is that Jane actually confessed to me that she built some of the puppets.
Hmm.
That was never part of our knowledge
Hmm.
base
Hmm.
for many years. Oh, Jim built these puppets, and then she's like, "Oh, I built a couple." And I'm like, "Well, this is amazing."
Hmm.
And she said, "Well, I know not that many." And then I finally got her to admit that, oh, maybe for every you know, two or three puppets Jim would build, I built one. And I think that's pretty significant.
Hmm.
Um, so I tried to incorporate that knowledge into the book. And it was just funny to me that she didn't think of that as a big deal.
Yeah. I saw an article about that recently, and I think it's probably right after someone read your book. And the picture for the article was her actually, she had probably like early visions of Yorick. She was painting it. And that just goes to show something as recognizable to people who know the older stuff from Henson to like that's Yorick. That's I know Yorick from
Yeah,
Accustomed
and
to
I
Your
th-
Face.
I think one of the things also is that she saw the Muppets as Jim's work.
Hmm.
He was the creative vision.
Hmm.
And I think one of the reasons that she may not have taken credit for it is that she had her own work. People
Yeah.
really didn't know about it, but she was doing her own art. And that was something
Hmm.
that Cheryl asked me to try and convey in the book,
Hmm.
was that, this was something that sort of happened to Jane
Hmm.
while she was about to pursue a completely different career path.
Hmm.
She had gone to art school. She was at the University of Maryland. She went to graduate school. She was planning on becoming an art teacher. She was doing her student teaching because she was a senior when she met Jim, who was a
Hmm.
freshman.
Hmm.
So she was already getting ready to go out into the workforce. She had a job offer at one
Hmm.
point, and Jim convinced her, "Oh, see, stick around, see what." And that's when she decided, "Okay, I'll keep working for Jim, but I'll go to graduate school. I'll take classes at Catholic
Hmm.
University." And um, you know, eventually she sort of put her personal work on the back burner
Hmm.
so she could work with Jim because the Muppets were becoming more successful. They were getting very busy. They needed to do a lot of stuff because they were doing commercials. They were doing the Sam and Friends show every day. They were doing live performances for benefits and things. It was just amazing. They were always going someplace or getting ready to do something, and they were doing stuff, national appearances, so they'd have to come to New York every once in a while. And years later, um, later in her life, she revisited her own work, and she went back and she did. she enrolled again, took classes again at Catholic University in Washington, and she would go, take the train down, and um, she started doing more of her own art again, and she had done uh, a version of a nativity story when she was much younger, and then she resurrected that project and turned it into a something. She designed the characters, and I believe a Henson workshop built them, and he did it was part of a show
Mm-hmm.
that the Paulist Church was doing on CBS.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beautiful. I went to the mass where they performed it, and it was just a very special thing that Jane was able to revisit. That sort of her life got put on hold
Mm-hmm.
to help Jim. Um, so to see, there was an exhibit that Karen Falk and Cheryl Henson put together at the Greenwich Library, or it was the Greenwich Historical Center in Connecticut, where Jim and Jane had lived for several years. And they brought Jane's art and they put it on display, and it had a whole, little separate section. It was part of a Jim Henson exhibit, so there were Muppet things and everything. But then, here's what Jane accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
It was totally, it was a delightful opportunity to see her work. So I think that may have been one of the reasons that she sort of deflected the attention, because I don't think she really felt that that was her work. She was very vital to the creation of it, but I think she always felt it was Jim's work. So she may have been uncomfortable taking credit, but she deserved a lot of credit.
He did. He did.
One of the stories I tell in the book was, Jane had to keep the show going. Jim wanted to take a summer off and go to
Mm-hmm.
Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and the TV station at that point wouldn't let him take the show off the air. So he had to get Jane to do it with a friend of his, Bob Payne, and they kept the show going really without his input. They didn't. It wasn't like he lined up a whole,
Mm-hmm.
here's what
Mm-hmm.
you do on this day and that day and leave a list. He took off, and it was up to them to program and create the show for the summer he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a great time doing it. I talked to Bobby Payne, and he said they just laughed all the time. They had a great time. And Jane said that Jim would call in from time to time from Europe or wherever he was, and he Jane got the feeling that he always expected them to be, oh, we're having trouble, we can't do it, but they never did that. They were having great time.
Hmm. Well, Craig, I'm looking at our time and we're almost out of time.
Almost out of
So
time.
already because we're having so much fun.
We are, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to come back and talk again.
So our closing, my closing question for you is if you didn't cross paths with Henson Company or Jim Henson, what do you think you'd be doing right now?
Hmm, that's a very good question. um I think I'd still be writing, and I would probably be writing, um I don't know what, but I mean, I love stories about show business and entertainment, and one of the reasons that I'm writing the new things that I'm working on. um but I don't know. um I'm going to have to think about that. But I think that I would still be. I love telling stories,
Mm-hmm.
and I love educating people about the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would either be a writer, or I would be, a professor or a teacher of some way. Because that's one of the things that I loved about doing this book, is that I feel like it teaches. It doesn't. It just informs people about something that happened a long time ago that is still very relevant to today. And I think it's something that will encourage and inspire audiences. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean. I love that whole story, and I'm still involved in Henson has given me an approval to get started on a follow-up to this Sam
Mm-hmm.
and Friends book. I'm going to be doing a collection of Sam and Friends scripts.
Mm-hmm.
because there's a chapter in the current book where I print 5 scripts from the
Mm-hmm.
archives,
Mm-hmm.
and people really liked seeing those
Mm-hmm.
and what the show was. So, because doing the, trying to do something with the audio that
Mm-hmm.
survives, there are so
Mm-hmm.
many legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that can be done.
Yeah.
Let people experience the show
Mm-hmm.
in their own imaginations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
But I don't know if that's a good enough answer for you. But
no, it's good.
I'd probably be writing, teaching, or maybe professional game show contestant.
Well, I mean, it basically mirrors what I'm trying to do right now, in that I'm trying to connect with you guys because you guys have so much history. I'm trying to connect. My next episode actually is gonna be with someone called Patty Ann Alley. She is the daughter of Mr. Ian Alley, and he in the 70s had a show called Ricky Tikki Tavi here in
Ah,
Trinidad, where he basically tried to create a street like much like Sesame Street. He tried to create like that kind of vibe and did puppet stuff. And he's basically the only person who tried to do children's television on an educational level. I'm not sure how long it lasted. There's not much archives, but right now his daughter is basically trying to put some stuff together so we could piece that through and see how we could find that history here and that connection here. Sadly, Ian is no longer with us, but his legacy lives on. And just like you're trying to, keep it together with Jim and keep that legacy going forward, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to go back to our roots. And that's the basically the premise of this whole series. It's what I'm trying to do.
it's a great thing, and one of the satisfying things about trying to do something like this and about writing
Hmm.
my book is I really get thrilled each time I see someone who has bought the book that I don't know.
Hmm.
I know that some people I know will get the book.
Hmm.
But one of the things that if people have bought the book, I'll mention this now. If you go to salmonfriendsbook.com,
Hmm.
there's an offer where you can send in and get an autographed book plate and a postcard and
Hmm.
a sticker and a
Hmm.
bookmark. Um, and I put that notice up, and I got a bunch of email requests, and it was just, boy, look at all these people that are interested in this
Hmm.
book, and
Hmm.
they don't know me, and they're still buying it.
Yep.
Um, so that's still, it's a wonderful thing to know that there are people out there who are
Hmm.
interested and wanting to learn more.
Well, before we close up, give us everywhere we can find that book.
Okay, so I think if you're outside of the United States,
Hmm.
you can get it through Amazon most
Hmm.
places. Salmonfriendsbook.com will give you all sorts of fun things about the book, and
Hmm.
there's um, some cool images and things. And if you want to buy the book directly from the publisher, bearmanormedia.com is the
Hmm.
publisher, and they will have periodic sales. So subscribe to them on social media, and then you can find out when they're putting the book on sale.
Well, I'll add all those links when you send them to me when I
Absolutely.
publish this podcast. And thank you for being here with us, Craig.
It is a pleasure,
It was a
Sherwin.
pleasure. It's so nice to meet you. Give my regards to Stephanie DeBruzzo.
I
I've
will.
always wanted to meet her. Maybe we could set this up with her sometime. Maybe.
We'll see what we can do.
You put in a good word for me.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, Craig. It was nice.
Same here.
Mhm.
Waiting to be